why would any Palestinian or Muslim or Arab today want to throw the Jews in the sea? What a ridiculous concept. How silly is that? Nobody's going to say yes. The first guy I asked said, and this is all in the video, this is the order. The first guy said, no, we don't want to throw them in the sea. This is a Zionist conspiracy. The Zionists made this up, that we want to throw them in the sea. And I was like, oh, I don't know how to make a joke from that. So, okay, I'll go to the next guy. Next guy says, yes, I want to throw them in the sea. And I'm like, no, sweetie, you don't understand my question. Obviously, you can't possibly understand my question. He goes, no, I understand your question. And I got someone to translate in Arabic. He said, they stole my land. Of course I have to throw them in the sea. And I was like, oh, shit. Like, this is what we're dealing with. Like, that was when I realized that according to the people I had voted for on the left, and that the situation is not how we were taught to see it on the left. That you could call a paradigm shift.
Okay, here we are with Corey Gil-Shuster. Corey, thank you so much for making the time.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Before we jump in and hear a little bit about your story and who you are, I just want to give you a little bit of a backdrop as to why we're on this call right now.
Sure.
So I was doing an internet search for a research project, and I came across Rabbi Yitzhak Breitowitz, who is a mentor of mine, a tremendous genius and sage, both in the academic and Torah world. And you know, it's an incredible thing that when I saw this footage of you asking him a particular question, you know, one of these out of the box questions, and he obviously answered it in his articulate way. I was taken aback a little bit because in this day and age, you know, we're in 2020, and in 2020, it's significantly different than 2010. 2010, internet digitally, you know, there was still something called organic, and in the organic virality of Facebook and social media, YouTube and whatnot, people were you know, putting everything up online. And these days, there's with Corona catalyzing the world to go digital, there's a huge push to figure out how to crack the code, so to speak, not in the internet hacking world, but you know, getting things to go viral and whatnot. What is the budget? People are talking about tremendous production budgets and you know, digital advertising budgets and creating that digital footprint that's going to bring their for-profit or even nonprofits traffic, you know, which would then translate into mission. So it's a fascinating thing for me to have seen your footage. Your footage was certainly not professionally done. No offense, Corey. Videography is not.
I don't know what I'm doing, is the truth.
But it was great because it was the content was the main thing. I mean, your hand was a little bit shaky.
Yes.
The microphone was picking up all sorts of background, but the content of Rabbi Breitowitz and the other people, not just the sages, but people on the street asking regular questions, or you know, and you know, right now I think you have well over 150,000 subscribers on YouTube. I saw you on PBS, picked up your story, and I said we got to get in touch with this guy. You know, what's the secret sauce there? I want to hear more about not just what you do digitally, but like the passion behind this project, the ACT project, and what motivates you as a conflict resolution specialist at Tel Aviv University. So maybe tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we can get into this concept of the perspectives, sharing perspectives, which is what Tribe Journal is all about.
Okay, sure. So I'm probably going to disappoint you because I don't have any great answers for you, but let me tell you what I know. So I am Canadian originally. I've been living in Israel for 20-something years. I mean, on and off for 30 years. So since 1989, and I married somebody Israeli, and we lived here, and then we lived in Canada, but I've been back and forth a lot. While I was in Israel before, it was during the second Intifada, actually. So up to about 2003, we had a child. And then we left for Canada. And when I was in Canada, I wanted to take psychology, to do a program, a master's in psychology, in how to understand the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, because I had experienced the Israeli side and I saw there's something there. There must be a way to explain what I had experienced with how Israelis see the conflict And then maybe I'll understand the Palestinians better, because that whole Oslo second Intifada caught me off guard completely. And it really bothered me as a person who really does want peace and want people to have good lives and that sort of thing. And I found a program called Conflict Studies, University of Ottawa. So it's like a conflict resolution program. I didn't even know what that was. And it helped me understand a little bit about what motivates people in conflict. We moved back to Israel in 2010, 11. And I'm looking for a job, and I'm bored, and I'm on Facebook groups. And I noticed, and I knew this before, so this wasn't new, but I noticed that there's a lot of people having conversation about Israelis and Palestinians and Israel and Palestine and everything that's involved. And almost none of them are Israeli or Palestinian. That's what was, that it kind of hit me while I was sitting in Israel. And I knew this. It wasn't like I didn't.
It's like, what's going on here?
It's a lot of Jews, Arabs, and those who support one or the other. And it's always somebody who supports one or the other. That's what's interesting. It's like a sports team. You take a side, right? You decide which team is your team.
Totally.
And you support whatever they do and whatever they think, you support it wholly.
You're referring to the media, people in the media, influential personalities.
On Facebook, but the media is a reflection of that too. Yes, the media definitely has an element in this. So I'm just talking about, you're in a Facebook group. Even before that, you had forums and different internet on websites. People are just picking a side and deciding who's right and who's wrong, and they all have the proof. It's almost always from Haaretz, and the proof could be anti-Israel or anti-Palestinian, but I think it's funny that it's from the same newspaper. It's the same. And they have proof of what they're trying to say about one side or the other. And what I kept noticing is that people had never been to Israel. They're not Palestinian. They don't live in the West Bank or Gaza, these people. But they always knew, and they had a video or an article that they could reference to say, here, you see why I'm right, this is it. And a lot of times, it's not that I don't think that they're right, because there's grains of truth in all of these things. It's not that, Haaretz is always wrong. It's not that. There's a grain of truth there. It's not entirely wrong. They're not understanding context. They're not, from my perspective.
The full picture is rarely
They're not
told.
understanding the big picture. They're not understanding this is a very specific slice of Israeli society or Palestinian society. Maybe, I don't know, Palestinian society. I don't know. And I just kept saying, well, why aren't they actually asking real Israelis or real Palestinians? And one day somebody said to me, what are you going to do? Go out and just ask people for their opinions? And I thought, wow, that's a really good idea. I have a video camera. Why am I not, when I go buy my vegetables and when I go to the supermarket and I'm having these schmoozy conversations, I don't know if you've been to Israel, I'm assuming.
Oh yeah, I was there during the Intifada as well.
Sorry?
I was there during the second Intifada as well.
Okay, so you have these conversations and whatever's in the news, they're talking about.
Yeah,
and
taxi
so
drivers. With the shook.
It doesn't mean the guy selling you the vegetables knows everything. It doesn't mean he's right. It's nothing to do with that. It has to do with, that's his perspective.
Right.
And I thought, wow, if I could just show people that, wouldn't that be interesting?
Brilliant.
So I went out and what was interesting is in this forum is that I dared people. I said, give me a question and I'll go out and film people's answers.
Yeah, they dared you, I think.
Sorry, what?
They dared you.
Well, no, they didn't even want to ask me a question. They knew.
Oh, really? At first, you couldn't get questions. Maybe just for the audience, explain the concept of the Ask Project, just in 30 seconds.
So the idea is, that's where I was born, is that you people send me a question. I go out and I try to frame it in the way you meant it. So sometimes I have to change it a little bit so people understand what I'm talking about. And I ask random Israelis and Palestinians on the streets. That's it. It's so Breitowitz, to give your example.
And you have now, in some of these videos, I mean, I've seen them. You're walking around. It looks a little bit like chutzpah, the way you're asking the question, but you're trying to ask it from their perspective, from the asker's perspective.
I'm trying. It's not always
as like a representative. And these have gotten millions of views online. I mean, you have millions of views and 150 plus thousand followers.
It's only a few. Not all of them have millions.
But still, I mean, that's over 1 million views is a story. That's you're talking CNN, NBC, ABC. That is the production level. I mean, most of their stories don't get that many views.
True, and we'll get to that part of how long it took. A long time. Okay, and it's only the ones about religion mainly or hate.
Interesting. Okay, I'm looking forward to this.
Sad to me, but that's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
But the idea is that I ask 8 to 10 people the same question. I try to ask it the same way. It doesn't always work exactly because they don't
Sure.
understand me or
Yeah.
whatever. And the idea is just to get a slice of what each society believes. And I really, really strive to be geographically representative, to be representative in terms of, if I'm asking a general question, I try to ask 3 religious people, because it's about 30% of Israel is religious. 1 Haredi, 2 religious, ultra-Orthodox, 2 modern Orthodox. I try to ask people who are what you would call traditional. So they don't wear a kippah, but they do keep some of the mitzvot. And then I ask secular people. And the idea is to just get a slice of what people think. It doesn't mean that you can watch a video and go, oh, now I understand completely. It just gives you a sense of what people think of about a very particular idea. And that's the idea, just to give
Very interesting. And of course, there's you're the journalist, so to speak. So you could be editing. I know there are some people with a political lean that do a similar thing in the United States, but they'll potentially show only the laugh out loud moment.
Yeah, I have a rule. First of all, everything I film, unless somebody tells me don't include it, and it happens sometimes. People go, you know what, don't include that, and I don't. Everything I post, including I've had to make entire videos around somebody when I asked an entirely different question. And I said, now I got to post it as an entirely different video, and it's got to be there. I have a rule about that. It's very important. Everything is included, and nothing is edited out for content. Nothing. Other than I sometimes edit out their names and where they're from, because some people actually say give a made-up name. That fair enough. And if somebody says you need to cut where I said something which is embarrassing to me. Interestingly enough, I know probably viewers are thinking, oh, if they said something racist against Arabs, or they said something, Palestinians say something racist against Jews. It's almost never that. If they want something cut, it's because, oh yeah, my mother's going to see this, and yeah, I just admitted to dating somebody, the wrong person, something like that. It's always something benign in our view, right? So, and the times that people have asked to be taken out of videos, it was always for saying absolutely benign things. They just didn't
Interesting.
Quite get it.
Self-conscious
They're
on
going to be
camera.
on YouTube, even though I explained to everyone, you're going to be on YouTube. They
Sure.
don't sometimes get it. And then I can usually talk them out of it. I go, look, there's thousands of people there. You're fine. No one's going to remember you. And then they almost always say, fine, keep it in. And once in a while, somebody says, take me out. I take them out. It's not a problem.
Sure. Nice. So let's go back. So how did you start this though? Like, you said it was a slow start, and maybe take us through that journey with.
So yeah, it started out at that conversation.
You know what? Let's give just a quick. I remember the early 2000s. I was in yeshiva at the time in Jerusalem, and so the Ben Yehuda Street bombing. I literally Saturday night, I felt a building miles away shake. I mean, it was a loud explosion, and there were other instances throughout that Tekufa, that period, where there was a case where an electric worker was called to Jaffa Gate, and they blew him away. They called him to do some electric work, and it was an ambush, and they literally just took a gun out and started firing at an electric worker. And I heard those shots fired when I was in the Beis Medrash learning Torah. It was Bein Hazman. So this was really close to everybody who was in Israel at the time. The buses were blowing up, and it was a really terrible, terrible time.
It was a difficult time and a confusing time, because you think, I, as a lefty, let's put it that way, sort of lefty, thinking we're gonna have peace any minute now. It's just gonna happen. And then at the same time, you have a process. You also have a lot of violence towards Israelis, and reciprocal violence towards Palestinians.
Right, so it was disheartening as well
because of this. And from their perspective, it was very different. But that was my experience. That was
right. And there were so many different opinions within the Jewish Israelis and the Palestinian Israelis. So that was a very turbulent political time as well.
So it was very confusing, and I wanted to understand, how does that even happen? Like, why does that happen? So part of what motivates me is not being caught off guard again. I want to understand the Palestinian street. The Israeli street I know, because I have to interact with them all the time. Palestinian street, I want to know, how would they react to this idea? What would they think if their president dies and the next guy comes, what are they going to think? I want to be prepared. It's a psychological thing. This is entirely about me, about being prepared. And along with it, I'm taking all of you, in a sense, on this journey to understand what is going on here. And I agree. You said before something about the media. There's of course bias in media. I mean, we all have bias. I walk into this making assumptions about even using the words. First of all, what is the right solution? We all have that bias. And then even the words that people use when they describe something, I'm making assumptions what they mean. It turns out half the time I'm completely wrong. And the media is completely wrong. And one of the great things about this is I can say, and sometimes I don't pick up on it, but every so often, you find out that what they're saying isn't what you think it is. It's not because they're lying. They're not lying. They're just using the same words in a different way. And they mean it differently. One of the examples I always give is there's the video, well, two videos, when I would talk about Palestinians about occupation. And to me, occupation meant West Bank and Gaza. And it turns out most of them, when they talk about occupation, they mean Tel Aviv, they mean Haifa, they mean Akko. And I didn't clue into this. It didn't.
Oh, interesting.
I didn't know.
That
and
it's
then
just
at a certain point,
the fact that there's a Jewish state is the occupation.
Is the occupation. Palestine is occupied, period.
It's less about the borders.
It's nothing to do with the borders. For most of them. There are some people who realize that Palestine in 48 is gone and they have to adapt. And that's okay by them. I mean, they're not happy about it. They're not thrilled about this idea, but they recognize the situation. And then the other thing was when you talk about peace with Palestinians and Israelis, they mean completely different things to each other. So you have to clarify, what do you mean by peace? Peace with who? And what does that actually mean?
Right. And there's also
side means something different.
Also, even just in this conversation, we're talking about they. Mm-hmm. There's so many different opinions. Just like in Israel, there are so many different opinions amongst the Jews. So too, there are so many opinions amongst the, I always get frustrated when I see the media and even just people talking about the Israel-Palestinian conflict. It's very much discussed as a, one or the other. And I think correct me if I'm wrong, I'd like to hear your thoughts, but there's more of a quadrant. It's more of a quadrant game. You have pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian, like pro-Jewish Israeli, whatever, and pro-Palestinian. Then you have pro-Israel and anti-Palestinian. Then you have pro-Palestinian and pro-Israel. And then you have pro-Palestinian and anti-Israel. But people simplify it. They oversimplify it to say it's just pro-Palestinian is equated with anti-Israel, and pro-Israel.
I think that's the majority of people. They just need to simplify. It's human nature. You need to think who's good, who's bad. If I like this side, therefore I must be against that side, and everything the side I support says must be true, and everything the side who are against
the tribalism.
Must be wrong. It's very tribal. Yes, absolutely.
Herd psychology is a very powerful thing because as an individual, people will have their own point of view and their own morals and values. But then once it's part of a greater whole, that sort of overrides their own judgment oftentimes.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
That will inform who they're going to side with and why. That's going to, what your values are. So you as a religious person, you're going to think one way, and me as a humanist who I don't believe in God at all, I'm going to think in a slightly different way. It's just going to inform how we see. Now, it doesn't mean you're politically going to necessarily be with a certain, it's more likely you are, but it doesn't mean it's the only part of you. Just like the other side is not necessarily going to believe exactly as everyone else does.
Yeah, Professor Jonah Berger at the Wharton School wrote a book, Catalyst, and he brings a study about. It wasn't his team, but the research was done. I forget where it was, where they did a study at, and they tested comedy. Like what is funny to you is actually herd psychology, and tribalism, so to speak, plays a role on what you think is funny. Okay. What they did was they brought subjects in and they tested them, and they would play the same role, the same what's it called? Comedy tracks,
comedy bits or whatever.
Yeah, comedy bits, and then they would have the laugh track, and they would play with the laugh track on the subject that the subject would be hearing. So when they told the subject that they were listening with people, like regular people, they tested it. Okay, control group would be listening to it regularly. Then it would be, okay, you're listening to it. If it was a person who was democratically leaning, if they were left leaning or whatever, they'd say you're listening to this with Democrats. If they were right leaning, they would say you're listening to this with Republicans. And they would have people sort of thinking that they were listening to the comedy with their group. And when they were told that they were listening with people of the other group, they found that there was actually it was equated with as if there were no laugh track at all. The laugh track is always helps you laugh. You watch any of these. It was like we see John Oliver, and right after Corona, without a laugh track, it was a very different show.
Sure.
But they take away the laugh tracks of the audience from a lot of these pundits. It becomes a very different experience.
Yep.
Questionably not funny.
Unfortunately, human beings are not that smart. I mean, that's what it kind of comes down to, that we seem to look for simplifications because we cite, this is or other people have said this, not my idea, but I believe that we need to psychologically feel we are part of a group and feel that we understand them and they understand us and we are connected. And therefore, if they say something is okay or something is bad, therefore we must believe it. And very few times do any of us, I don't care how educated you are, do we even question half of what we hear or do. So it's a problem. That's part of
what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on the role of herd psychology overcoming the perspective of the individual? So that how much does herd psychology, does the group thought influence the individual's thought?
I think,
and I'm speaking specifically in regards to conflict resolution.
Yeah, I think it's huge. I mean, you should speak to better experts who study in social psychology. But you see it. You see that. So I'll give the example of how when you have a leader who tells you these people are bad, or the opposite, a leader who leads you into a peaceful situation. If he's a strong leader or she is a strong leader and they're respected, it's amazing how quickly people will rally, will reverse their views about it. So we had something like Anwar Sadat who changed the situation in Israel of people believing in peace with Egypt, whereas before it's not that they didn't want peace, it's just they thought we can't trust these people. And somebody did this incredible move of recognition of Israelis, and it helped move people along. And so it's a type of herd psychology. It's a way of breaking a barrier, and the problem is you need leaders who actually do these things, as an example. So unfortunately, they can also do the opposite. They can also say these people are bad and these people have done us wrong, and that's where a lot of conflicts have gone out of control. So it has a huge role. And also just the daily stuff more than the leader. I mean, the leaders lead us. They have definitely a role in all of this. But to me, it's more interesting the day-to-day people, the people you talk to all the time, who also lead you a little bit. They kind of, they motivate you to think a certain way. So that's what at least for me, I'm trying to capture. What's going on? How do people see it? What is that herd psychology at the moment?
So when there's an exchange, when people can see what the other group is thinking,
Mm-hmm.
That breaks down the stereotypes that are keeping people apart. Is that that's what you're going for there?
What I'm going for is at least we understand what we're dealing with.
Oh, so you're sort of like a not incognito, but a cognito fact finder for the world.
Kind of. I've been accused personally, my personal, like who I am. I'm that person who has to talk about the elephant in the room. If there's a problem and nobody's talking about it, it drives me crazy. So I think that's a little bit of the motivation here, is that we're not talking about how each side sees the conflict in this case. so differently that if you speak to a Palestinian, you speak to an Israeli, you might as well be talking to a Sri Lankan and a Peruvian, because they're talking about completely different conflicts in their minds. And I'm trying to say, guys, spotlight. Look at what they're talking about. I'm not agreeing with them. It has nothing to do with agreement. I'm saying this is what is. And if you want to solve a problem, if you want to solve a conflict, you need to deal with what is instead of what you wish it was.
Right.
And so that's what I'm doing. That's my contribution to conflict resolution, is saying, spotlight, this is what's happening. I have my own ideas of what should happen, but I'm probably wrong. I'm probably completely wrong. So, as are most people. But I think all I can really do is show what regular people have to say, and so people have an understanding of that.
What role does the media play in
the conflict in general?
You know, I'll give you an example.
Like complicated.
I'm here in Boston, and went on campus. I met a young man, a student who grew up, his parents as well, in Jerusalem, Palestinian, and he was saying how life in Jerusalem is great. You know, that they're able to move around freely and everything, and there's really no difficulty that they see in the media. The media, the way it portrays life for Palestinians, is in a tremendously negative light. But he was very much very comfortable growing up and whatnot in Jerusalem. There was no stigma there. He did mention that obviously when he goes to different parts of Israel that there might be more of a challenge, but he said that his experience was not. Well,
like I'm glad he had that experience.
And we don't really hear that voice. We don't really.
Well, I would also suspect. I would clarify if he was in front of me. Are you saying this because you're talking to a Jew and you're trying to be kind and nice and hospitable? And there's another side that you're kind of leaving out where there are some issues. I would say this to everybody.
Maybe. Exactly. I mean, he was sitting at a table with a friend from Syria, and you know, these were not Jewish people. I mean, I was in the minority in the group.
No, and I would hope. Look,
and it was also in a conversation where he, you know, and then I was like, can I film this? This is really, and I pulled out the camera myself.
They do exist.
I pulled the Gil.
I know people exactly like that. So I'm not saying this doesn't exist. I'm saying.
I mean, we've all had taxi drivers as well, but you're saying that maybe they're just being polite. Or is that what you're suggesting?
I think that there is a habit here of hospitality, of wanting to be friendly and kind and good to each other, that even if you think other things, you're just not going to forefront that part at the moment. So
you think there's the conversation that they might have in public, but then in private they have a very
not necessarily. I don't know what this. I don't want to second guess what this person would say. Yeah. I'm just saying that people are complicated, and he might have other views, as we all do sometimes, where we curse the other side in some way because we're frustrated, because we've had a frustrating experience. Getting back to the media, though. The media, on the one hand, is supposed to be there to do kind of what I think I'm doing, is, you know, exposing things, not exposing, but, you know, putting a spotlight on this is what's going on. But if you follow media from different countries, you get a story told to you from every country. It's a little bit different because the people walking into the situation understand it from a different perspective. Because I'll give the Canadian example. If you listen to CBC, because I'm Canadian, if you listen to the CBC, Canadian news, about Israel-Palestine, everything is, why can't you just get along? We all get along. Canadians are, you know, we get along. That's what we strive for, you know, being anti-conflict. Why can't you guys just do this? Other media are much more about these people suffer. The Palestinians in this case suffer. Or it might be, you know, more pro-Israel. Look how much the Israelis suffer. What ends up happening, because I know media people, is they come into the situation, they don't speak Hebrew, they don't speak Arabic, they don't know the cultures, they learn something from their, you know, through however they learned it, and they kind of recreate that. They recreate that story that they've been told, or they look for it. I'll give you an example. We've had people, I'm trying not to out anybody, people from Turkish television, come to me and saying, I'm looking for a story about how Mizrahi Jews suffer so much under the Ashkenazi. And I'm like, my husband is Yemenite. I like, sorry, that's not my, you know, there have been examples. It's not that it doesn't exist, But that was 60 years ago. Like, that doesn't really happen now. I mean, you can make kind of an argument a little
Will
bit,
come to you looking for the story.
but they
That's
look for
interesting.
that's my point. It's another one. I remember I was with a friend in a park in Tel Aviv, and she's from Lebanon, and she said, "Oh, that guy's from Al Jazeera. Let's go hear what he's asking people." And he was interviewing Sudanese asylum seekers, and all she translated in my ear. He said, "The reporter from Al Jazeera says, so tell me, how did the Jews make you suffer?" And then puts the microphone in his face. So if you're looking for a very specific story, of course, people love victimhood. Gives you a sense of identity. It gives you a sense of you're doing something for your cause. It's very easy to find. Does it mean it's the only truth? I mean, being a victim, people here have been victimized. Just like you gave the example of people who are victims of terror in Israel. You can easily find stories of people who have been victimized. That's not a problem. But that's not the whole story. That's not everything. It's much more complicated than that, and it's not very helpful. I mean, it's not that I don't want to feel guilty for Israelis who have victimized Palestinians. I mean, none of us like to feel guilty, but that's not the whole story. That's not everything that happens has a reason. Doesn't mean I like the reason. Doesn't mean I agree with the reason. But there are reasons behind it, and there's motivations behind it. All I want to do is understand that, and I think the media does a very poor job of that. That's my criticism. I still think they're needed. I don't want to be anti-media, but sometimes I hear what they have to say, and I'm like, guys, you got it wrong. Like when they're talking about us, the Israelis, the Jews, like they get things wrong, and that just annoys me. So this is
it is terribly frustrating,
and I get things wrong too. There have been many times you hear in the videos where you hear me go, "So you mean whatever?" and people say, "No, not at all," because I got it wrong. Which is fine, which is great. I'm happy somebody corrects me. So
right, beautiful. So you're how often do you get on the street and ask these questions?
in non-corona times, I try to do it once a week.
Once a week.
At least, yeah. Try to my Fridays and Saturdays, and then every so often I take a vacation day from my job to get middle of the week type people. Mostly if I have to go to religious areas, because Friday everyone's getting ready for Shabbos. Shabbat I can't interview them, so I take days off to interview religious people. So
and what camera you use? Literally like a hand.
It's a hand cam. It's very simple. I bought it at Best Buy for $200. The first one, and the second one was a little bit better. I don't even remember the brand. I don't remember the first brand. Panasonic, actually. Yeah, they stopped making them. It looked like a gun. It was great.
Yeah. And what do you edit in?
Through Power Director, it's called.
Oh, interesting. Is that one of those free online things?
No, it's not online. I bought it, but it's very simple. I don't know what I'm doing with editing. You could tell, like, people who are film people criticize me all the time, saying your lighting is terrible, your sound is off. Right. What are you doing? And I said, when are you going to get a Palestinian or an Israeli to stop for 15 minutes so you can set up a microphone, so you can set up the lighting so it'll just be right? No one will stop for that long, period. So if you want to get real people, this is what you have to do. So, and then I didn't think about it, but people point out it looks more real this way. So it wasn't.
I think authentic. You authentic, capture,
but it wasn't the intention.
Footage.
It was just me being, saying I only have 2 minutes with this person. I got to do it quickly.
Right. In some ways, it's more authentic because it's not professionally done.
True.
Sometimes if there's like if the camera is stable and the lighting's perfect and there's a microphone, then it actually loses its authenticity.
Sure. And you could tell often, at least I can tell now, when people knew the question before. I don't almost never tell people the question before I ask it on camera.
To get them on the spot, right?
You need to show, like, even with mostly actually for the ridiculous questions, no offense to people who ask ridiculous questions, because they think they're good questions. When you see people's reaction of, what is that? What are you saying? That's ridiculous. That I think is valuable to know that the person being asked the question thinks that's a ridiculous question. I'm not saying it actually is a ridiculous question, because there are questions I think are terrific questions that I've asked people and they just go, come on. And I think, I think that's a good question. But I think it tells you a lot if you see people's reactions and expressions on their face.
How has it changed you, Gil? going up and asking questions that you normally wouldn't ask, and then getting answers that you would be surprised. Like, how has that changed you as a person
Oh, it
and
changed me.
as a citizen of Israel?
Well, it made me more. There are a lot of. I knew Israeli society pretty well. Israeli secular and traditional society. Let's clarify. So the society you lived in Jerusalem, I didn't know it at all. Like, that just wasn't my world. Jerusalem.
Really? Where did you live?
Sorry.
Where did you live?
I lived in. Let's see. I lived on a moshav near Ashdod in Gedera area.
Mm-hmm.
I lived in Haifa, I lived in Yehud, and then I lived in Tel Aviv later. So I lived in these sort of traditional/secular areas, not with ultra-Orthodox so that's a whole other world. But it changed me that I think I'm much more. I think it surprised me. I think so. So one thing you'll like is I didn't know settlers very well. And I didn't know their worldviews, and I expected them to be a lot more extreme and more radical. And I found that actually, it's a much more moderate society than I thought of and expected.
What was the word? I missed the word. Who?
Moderate settlers. So Jewish settlers in.
Like the religious settlers,
or even secular settlers. Yes.
Oh, okay.
But I had this expectation that if somebody lives in Gush Etzion or in Beit El, they're going to be much more extreme in their views than they are. And I do you get more paranoia for sure.
Meaning they're just chilling out there on the mountaintops over there, living their life out and passionate about
I would say
land.
In a delusional state.
But it's not like we're taking over Israel and they're just living their life.
Yeah. They're in their world. They're in their bubble, like where everyone's in a bubble, and they think their lives are totally normal, and they have a particular worldview. And okay, and I expect.
So it's share with me now. I'm going to play the Corey Gil-Shuster card here. Like, share with me your perspective on that.
Of them?
Yeah. Like, what was your perspective going in? What did you perceive them as?
Extremism. I expected to hear when I asked them about Palestinians, because that's really what people want to know. They don't really care about, why are they there? Why are they abusing Palestinians? Why are they stealing land? That's really all people want to know, outside people.
That's the outside people.
And I expected them to be much more extreme, much more racist towards Palestinians. And just have much more extreme views, like Kahana Chai type views. And I found most people are what I would call, this is my opinion, delusionally moderate, meaning when the Arabs understand that the Jews will make things good for the Arabs, the Palestinians, they'll be good little tatalas and they will live the way we think they should live. It's in my opinion, this is my opinion, it's a little condescending. It misses the point of what even Zionism is, that Zionism is the idea of self-determination. Why don't they have their own self-determination? It kind of misses out on that, well, they can't have it because they're violent and they can't get their act together. So we have to control, and also we can't trust them is the other thing. And I'm not saying any of that is entirely wrong. It just was my impression. It's a little delusional, thinking that meaning the delusional part is that the Palestinians are going to wake up one day and think, I'll be controlled by these Jews. They're making things good for me. I'll have businesses and that'll all be good. I don't think that's going to happen. It actually, by the way, in conflict resolution, it's a form of conflict resolution, because if they actually did agree to that, well, then there's no conflict. Then we're all good. It's all fine. So I just don't think that's going to happen, because I have this argument. I have a few friends who live in West Bank settlements, and their interaction with Palestinians is the opposite of what happens to me. Meaning they hear all the time, yes, living under you Jews is wonderful and terrific and great. That's why I kind of pointed this out about the Jerusalem guy. And I'm like, but that's not what I hear when I'm in Ramallah and in Nablus and they're always looking for reasons why that is. Well, you're not meeting the real people. You're not meeting the right people. And I'm like, okay, but where do I find these right people? Because I'm going everywhere.
I just clarify that point. You're saying the Jerusalem guy was the one that I met on campus, right? Who was from Jerusalem and had a positive experience growing up in a Jewish state of Israel. You're saying now, and he told me, just full disclaimer, he did tell me that in other parts, it's not like that. You know, when they go to visit relatives in other parts or whatever it might be. So you're saying that the people in the other parts, you can't find someone to say what?
When I go to Ramallah and Nablus and Bethlehem, or villages in that area, because I'm meeting people in Ramallah who are often from villages around, so it's a good. I can now, just like I can identify who the Israeli characters are, I can identify who the Palestinian characters are to a certain extent, and I have a translator and I say, okay, village, city, what are we talking about? Educated, less educated, that's what it is. So I'm really trying to get a cross section. I almost never hear, on camera or off camera, people who say, yes, I want Israel to control the entire land and live with the Jews. No, that's going too far. And have Israel control. Let's put it that way. I almost never hear that.
Meaning they want their own autonomy, their own government, their own autonomy.
What I hear mostly is Palestine was stolen, meaning Tel Aviv was stolen from them. They want it back.
They want it back. Okay, that's where you're going.
Yeah.
So that's where the line is.
What happens?
The line is drawn that there's no line.
They forget the green line. Just ignore that. And what happens to the Jews? And they kind of look at me like, "Oh, I never thought of that." Like there's not even a thought. Yeah, there's sort of this idea, and I'll put it in a different way. If you look at Algeria was colonized by France until 1956. Bad with dates. They were colonized for a very long time by France. Palestinians see themselves as similar in that way. They've been colonized by these European Jews, and their job is to get rid of them. And then if you say, well, what happens to the Jews? If they think about it, some of them will say, well, I guess we could live together, but under Palestine, it's Palestine. The Palestinians control, not the Jews. And then some of them say, no, they have to go back to Europe because according to Palestinians, everybody's from Europe or America. That's the dominant.
Even though there are plenty of Jews, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Jews that came from Arab lands.
It's 55 to 60%. It's actually the majority.
Oh, really? It's that high? Wow. So you think 55 to 60% of Jewish Israelis are
Mizrahi. Yeah.
Are Mizrahi, meaning from the Arab countries in the eastern and Middle
depending
East.
on how you count, because then there's 10% of those are mixed between Ashkenazi and Mizrahi, and depending if you consider like Jews who came from Kazakhstan or something like that as Mizrahi. But yeah, and if you just take Ashkenazi Jews, that's like 35, 40%. It's not, they're not the majority. Yeah.
Interesting. So
but
can we shift gears? I think it's interesting, a point that you subtly brought up when you spoke about the Jewish religious or non-religious settlers, that there is a left and a right, just like in the United States, there's Republicans and Democrats. Israel's a lot more nuanced. There are a lot more parties, but there is an overarching religious discussion or lack of discussion happening between the religious and non-religious communities. Maybe what are your thoughts on that? Because you did mention that one of your videos had a lot of the religious-oriented videos go much more viral than the.
Wait, I got to clarify that. But by religious-oriented videos, it's because Christians are interested. Not Jews.
Interesting. It's
very interesting to watch to see who watches my videos, and it's hard to know. You can't know if somebody's Christian or not. But the most views I get I assume are from, or the most questions I get is about why we don't believe Jesus is the Messiah. And no matter how many videos I make about it, and that's why I went to Breitowitz the second time, by the way, is because
that was the video I saw.
I'm like, can we settle this once and for all? We don't need to believe
that's the right guy. That's for sure.
You don't have to, right?
Anyone who doesn't know Rabbi Breitowitz, he graduated from Harvard Law School and was a professor for decades at the University of Maryland School of Law, primarily because he was a big rabbi in Silver Spring. He probably could have been a professor.
I found him by accident. I walked into Sameach Yeshiva with a guy who used to study there, who's American, or he's Canadian, and he said, let's just walk around and see if we can find some yeshiva students to ask them. And I'm like, terrific. And we knocked on doors, and he just happened to be there.
He is such a sage. I started off with his academic achievements in the collegiate world, but but in the
And he was
Torah
just,
world,
and
in
it
the
was
Torah
totally,
world, he is a giant
he is a
saint.
pleasure to talk to because,
Right.
again, he explains things in a rational way
Softly and calmly and
that
just very,
and
yeah.
calmly, and he didn't get upset by any of my
No,
questions.
no,
But they're
he's
obnoxious. I agree.
yeah,
They're obnoxious, but to a religious person, to be
he's
like,
very
why
real,
can't you
right?
believe Jesus is the Messiah? He is, according to them, not according to me.
Right.
And he's like, okay, let's take this piece by piece.
Yeah.
He was amazing.
Brilliant man.
So
Yeah.
so the religious questions get the most views because I think Christians and Muslims now just are so, each religion is so obsessed with their views and why other people don't believe what they believe. And
Yeah.
so I didn't expect that because I was thinking all the time about politics. I don't, no offense, I don't care that much about religion. I think it's interesting. I don't want to offend anyone. And I very much believe in, everyone has the right to believe whatever they want. It's just not my interest. And so, but I notice they get the most views. So I throw some in all the time. And then I have to take a friend of mine who is ultra Orthodox, or I have some Haredi friends. I have to take them with me because I don't understand half of what these people are saying to me. Because first of all, as you know, Jerusalem religious people mumble in Hebrew. They speak Yeshivish. They throw in Yiddish, which unfortunately I don't know because my grandmother didn't speak to me in Yiddish. So I have to bring people with me to translate.
Translate their English.
They're Hebrew. Pretty much get it's when it's in Hebrew that I'm just
right.
Very,
That's
very
great.
confused.
That's awesome. So let's go. I want to go down that road with you.
Sure.
If you'll be so kind. What are some big paradigm shifts that you've had speaking as a self-proclaimed leftist, Israeli leftist, or a Canadian Israeli leftist, interacting with the ultra Orthodox in Israel? What were some of the big paradigm shifts? Because just by way of background, in America, there is a bit of a rift as well between the religious, the yeshiva community, if you want to call it that, and the secularists, or the less religious, or really secularists, I think is the more accurate word. There's a rift. There's a propaganda, almost, if you will. There's a propaganda against the ultra Orthodox community, which I find to be terribly frustrating. You take the movie like Unorthodox, and these types of attempts to slander entire communities based on a small minority opinion. And
okay, that's interesting. So you saw that as propaganda?
Oh, it's so inaccurate. It's as inaccurate. Yeah.
No, interesting. I have no idea how accurate it is because I didn't grow up Orthodox, obviously.
Right.
But
right.
To most secular Jews and Israelis, they see that as, oh, that's an interesting window into that world. Wow, how fascinating.
Right.
And they don't see it as a slam, and they don't see you as, if anything, it humanizes Orthodox people. If anything.
Oh, that's interesting because
very much so.
Because it's perceived as clawing away and trying to tar and feather the black hat, so to speak.
It's not how it's. See, that's an interesting thing. It's in conflict. That's what happens. Is we tend to focus on aspects that we think the other side is saying, no matter who the other side is. So in this case, Orthodox versus secular, and it's not what they're saying.
But let me ask. Let's go a level deeper than that. I mean, is it fair to say that from our perspective, our leftist perspective, we just saw it as a nice, interesting window? I mean, if it's a misrepresentation of an entire population, let's say, if it's the minority of the minority of that particular stream sect of ultra Orthodox Judaism that feel that way, and they didn't present a full picture, then it's actually a misrepresentation, even though it's a window, and that does unconsciously alter the perception that secular Israelis or secularist Americans.
But not in a necessarily negative way. You're kind of putting too much. And
how do speak that out? I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
The same thing. I've done exactly. I'll give you an example. I'm gay, so I see portrayals of gay people all the time, and I'm like, guys, no, you got it wrong. Like, what are you doing? And really, does it matter? No, it really doesn't. As long as people are humanized to a certain extent, it's good enough. Even if you get it wrong.
I'm not sure I agree with that. I think that if you look into manufactured consent, right, and the way that media influences masses, this is something that's been happening for well over 100 years. And it's, the democratic societies are influenced by the media in a tremendous way, and most of it's unconsciously, subconsciously.
Mhm.
So, even though I understand what you're saying, and I agree with you that we have our perspective on what they are portraying us as, whoever the we and the us are, right, and the they are. But still, I'm not so quick to say that it doesn't influence opinion about a particular group.
Well, give me an example of how it influences, like in a negative way. Give me an example how you think secular people now see because of, let's say, unorthodox as an example.
Okay. I'll give you an example. I did a vlog on tribejournal.org where we spoke about. Um, I don't know if I want to go there. I mean, I just recently did a thorough analysis of, on topic. There was a LGBTQ activist
Mm.
who grew up not religious at all, and she wrote about her experience growing up with a Jewish father and how she chose pride as her religion as opposed to
Pride
the
as
menorah.
religion.
Yeah, like the Pride Parade was what she wants to give her and her wife. They want to give her children a religion, like they connect more to the Pride Parade and the celebration that happens at the Pride Parade. Then they have no connection to the menorah. So the whole article was this person who's ignorant of Judaism,
Mm.
proclaims that she's ignorant of Judaism, but then polarizes her experience. And again, it's an authentic experience. And as she wrote in an apology, that she just wants to, she just wants to take us on a journey, and of her journey, which is great. And stories are powerful tools, right? But what she did that might have been insensitive to the Jewish community is that she sort of at the end, for example, said that I choose to give something like my children love, no menorah attached, and it's
Okay.
not. And so that statement is really subtle. It's a subtle statement where it sort of pegs the menorah as like if my children don't light the menorah, then I'm not going to love them. That there's it wasn't explicitly said, and it may not have been consciously conjugated by the reader, but the underlying premise was certainly there. That when you peg the question as menorah or love the children, it's so subtle. Now, again, this is an LGBTQ activist who writes. She wrote a book on the history of it, and she's blogging everywhere. So then it becomes a question: was that an intentional story? Which I wrote instead of me just like taking to the blog sphere like a lot of people do, and they immediately lash out and defend. And I actually wrote her an email, and just much like I reached out to you, I just out of
How did she
curiosity.
react? What did she say? I'm
She
curious.
had she said I asked her to appear on a podcast or whatnot. She said she wasn't interested. She had a couple of dozen people reached out to her, but she wrote something on Medium that responded to, and it basically it was a public apology that it wasn't her intention and whatnot. But I mean, obviously the reader could ask. um, she is an LGBTQ activist, and so she did have an agenda to tell her story, which should be told. It's her perspective. You want to tell your perspective. No one's taking offense to that. But when people speak about their own personal story, they do have to be sensitive to minorities and people who are and with an increase of anti-Semitism and all of these things going on, and the assimilation rate, which is tremendous, which her story is part of. So it wasn't. I made my vlog and I accepted her apology and I defended her and whatnot, and but it's still a question to the reader. But my point is that those subtle choices of words and framework in which stories are presented can actually, I think, have a great influence. In other words, like this: if a reader was reading it and they are also pro LGBTQ, and they are assimilating, they have very little connection to Judaism. So then in political science, there's a cross sectionality when you're an activist for a particular cause, whatever that may be. And so one of the strategies, I'm sure you're aware of, when it comes to Israel and Palestine and the whole, debate there, is to cross section, your cause with another cause. So in many ways, Black Lives Matter maybe not the movement, but the organization, aligned themselves with the BDS movement. And so many of the people who are pro-Israel were very upset about that, because it sort of gave them this inner conflict. Like, well, I'm certainly for civil rights for the people of color, but on the other hand, there is this very important issue to me, which would, and BDS is, is like against that very important issue, and so, but that's the political game.
But that's what I was saying at the beginning of how when people see a conflict, any conflict, whether it's religious, secular, or Israel-Palestine, there's always this need to simplify and to make things seem like they're very black and white. And you want to have allies. So these are people who are behind the scenes. They're trying to get as many people to support whatever their cause is, whatever that is. You're religious. You want as many allies as possible. It happens, and it annoys me all the time, even when I agree with the actual cause, because life is way more complex than that. It is much more complicated, and it just creates conflicts. That's the issue. It just creates more and more divisions and conflicts. And I am very, live and let live. Like, again, I as I say, I'll use the religious settlers as the example. It has nothing to do with agree or disagree. They're people who have a position and they have views, but they also have lives that are very complicated, like everyone else. And if I can show that they, yes, have opinions, and sometimes they're awful opinions. I mean, not just settlers, just anybody. But at the same time, they're also human beings, that these opinions come from a place, usually an experience that people have had, or a story that they've been told. And if people can understand that, it's better than the alternative of creating these camps of who's with me, who's against me, and because that just perpetuates conflicts. And I'm not a good resolver of conflicts. I very much admit to it. I'm not a good negotiator. I'm not a good mediator. But if we can point out that people are human beings and they have motivations and reasons, and if I can even find some humanity and that's what I found in most people, you can find some humanity, even if they're saying, on the one hand, something which I think is awful or somebody thinks is awful, but on the other hand, they also have some humanity to them. I would hope people would look at them with much more compassion and say, okay, these things, and it doesn't mean you have an answer. I mean, that's what everyone wants. They want to know who's right, who's wrong. I don't know. I mean, I think I know who's right and who's wrong, and I can be against them or for them, but what does that help? Does that really help solve the problem? So,
sure. So shifting back to the religious paradigm amongst the Jewish people, whether it be in Israel or whether, I think it's more pronounced in Israel, but it's becoming more intense, I would say, in America. There was another talk for another time. To your point that it was a window in. There are different windows, let's say, in media that we've seen. We've seen, for example, Unorthodox, and we've seen Shtisel, right?
Mm-hmm.
So with Shtisel, it's very interesting that the actors and the actresses, I don't think they're Orthodox.
No, I don't think any of them are.
And I thought that was a fascinating. You essentially have. I mean, there were no actors that would do this. I mean, was there an attempt? I mean,
Unorthodox, interesting enough, the guy who, I forget his name, but
my point. Let me just make this quick point that Shabbos, for example, is such a deep thing. Mm-hmm. Lighting the Shabbos candles, a person could watch, even the greatest actor or actress could watch a mother with her children lighting the Shabbos candles and try to emulate it. But there's something deep, when we have a deep emotional connection to something, you can't fake that. Mm-hmm. A good actor or actress might be able to, but my question is like, why? Like, were there really no Orthodox, ultra Orthodox people that were willing to appear on such a show? I think my
guess is no. My guess is it's still there's.
I think that would be an interesting investigative report, and instead of we're both speculating. I'm
Yeah, we don't.
speculating.
I don't know.
Yes,
I don't know the.
I'm speculating that they could have found
small.
Did
Well, no,
they
but
even look?
my guess is, and I'm speculating. You're right.
Yeah,
Is
yeah.
that the difference between ultra orthodox in Israel is there? A lot of them are very much more than the U.S. are much more cut off from mainstream culture, and it's almost taboo to be involved in mainstream culture. So I don't think you're going to have many
yeah.
ultra orthodox Haredi, use a rocker word, Haredi actors and actresses. I don't think you're going to have that very much in Israel. I could be wrong.
I think you'd be surprised. I really do, Corey. I think you'd be surprised at how many people would be. First of all,
Send
like,
me the question to
yeah.
ask Haredim say Bar-Ilan. What's the neighborhood near Tel Aviv?
Sharon.
And all over. And I'll ask only Haredim. This is a good question. Is it okay to become an actor or something like that?
For sure, there are plenty of. I mean, this guy Peter.
No, an actor for the secular, meaning like not just putting on a play in your own community.
I think you'd be surprised, and I'll give you a different example.
I always love being surprised by.
Here's you know, I've run birthright trips, multiple birthright trips, and we once had a madrich, one of the the leaders, that the tour guides and whatnot. That so he did an experiment which I thought was really also unfair and misleading. At best, damaging, tremendously damaging. So the experiment on the trip was not experiment, but the exercise was that they broke the group into 40 students into 4 different quadrants. So they had 10 groups, 4 groups of 10, and the soldiers were then going to debate publicly with each group and have a discussion for 5-10 minutes on a particular issue that Israeli society is dealing with. So in one of the quadrants, in one of the groups, we had 2 female soldiers, not religious, debating the religious versus the non-religious Israeli society. And I thought it was just, it was interesting, obviously.
Meaning one of them was taking on the religious point.
One was supposed to play out, I'm the religious person's explaining. And then, so obviously you have, one of the soldiers said, if you go into any of our neighborhoods, you'll get dressed like that, you'll get spit on. I was just like, I couldn't watch. I had to interrupt because it's just not true. There are neighborhoods. I said, so I asked her, I didn't correct her. I just asked her questions. I said, how many religious people, how many religious communities are there? And
how many religious neighborhoods?
And we broke it down. We're talking to we're talking about, she was referring in her mind to I think the community that you referred to earlier, or one of them nearby there. And her experience was, that was her stereotype, at least.
Yeah.
And anyone who knows, there are areas.
Reports anything that's sensational and exciting, and so you're going to hear about that. How true is it? I have no idea. I've never been a woman, and I've never.
Well, no, I think there is truth to that. I wasn't questioning that, but to represent the entire Orthodox community based on her experience or what she heard someone had an experience. And again, that area is a shopping mall. That area is like, people grew up in there, and they have a community that became a tourist attraction. So I have my own experiences there. Trust me. Like as a person who was learning in yeshiva, I myself have had experiences there. It's not a simple place for a child to grow up. You can't even imagine. But that's not my point. My point is this concept that we're discussing about breaking down the barriers and the stereotypes and and hearing the other's perspective. As a leftist, that you mentioned that you're a leftist, what have been like the main paradigm shifts, that you've had interacting with the religious community? My point was like simply that, that there is misrepresentation, that these stereotypes do exist. And I'm just trying to flesh that out a little bit.
I can't really point to anything specific. I mean, I didn't go into it with, of course I have preconceived ideas, but nothing shocked me, nothing. The only thing I can say is that in places like Mea Shearim are very, very, the most Haredi areas, the strictest ones, the dynamics are interesting to me in the sense that, for example, when I'm walking around with my camera. By the way, I never had any problems. Nobody ever yelled at me. Nobody ever got mad at me. I never, like these things I see in videos of people.
Corey, they'd probably invite you for Shabbos. Like, if you want, I'll set you up at someone. You can go for Shabbos for a Friday night dinner there. I'm not kidding.
I can't now think, but I can't.
I'm just explaining. It's
of course,
that's part of the stereotype, right?
But that wasn't my stereotype. My stereotype is that people were going to yell at me, and in these very, much more extreme, they were going to get mad at me and think that and then people would, sometimes they would get, they wouldn't yell, but they would get a little defensive, but everybody here gets defensive. So that's nothing new. But what was always interesting is that they would say, hold on, come here. And they would take me into an alley, and there I could film them. As long as nobody saw them being filmed, it was okay. That sort of surprised me. That doesn't happen in secular society. In secular society, if you say, if you give them a tough question, they get mad at you, or they don't get mad at you, or whatever. But this idea of what is, by the way, it's the same in Palestinian society, of what is considered proper in public is just different between religious and secular.
It's
so
very
then
interesting.
Filmed, and I don't mean all religious. I mean, I'm talking about the Mea Shearim mainly, and a few other. But they would be like, as long as I'm not known, and it's nobody can see.
You're saying that happened enough times that you saw that it was a thing that people didn't want to.
It was a thing. I never had that in secular society. I have it in Palestinian society sometimes.
And it wasn't just a question of those streets are packed and busy and
no. It was like, I was told, I don't want people to see me. They're going to talk. There's a lot of rumors that go around.
Interesting. That's interesting.
I don't need that.
That's interesting.
That kind of thing. So that was interesting, but that's.
And I think that community is politically unique as well.
Yes,
I mean
exactly.
And it's maybe I would say less than 1% of the overall.
Oh, yeah, it's a tiny percentage. Yeah. And the only reason I go there periodically is because people actually ask for, get me Nutzurei Karta, get me like these groups, Plugate Yerushalmi, like these groups that are considered the most radical.
I thought you were just going to say crazy, and I thought you were going to say crazy and out of the camp.
In what sense? What do you mean? Sorry.
I mean, if you see a guy with a beard and payas, this goes back to our original sort of the kibun of our discussion. That if you see a guy with beard and payas holding a "Destroy Israel" sign with the Palestinian flag on it.
Yeah, I've never seen that, but okay.
But well, they have. Vice News did a whole special on them in England. I mean, this is a very publicized thing.
But you have to go look for them.
But that's a circus. That's the circus. If you find a book about a ultra Orthodox child who grew up and went off and on her journey and her personal journey, and then it's taken out of context. It's literally like dramatized, and it lost complete connection to the book almost. That's all propaganda. How is that not propaganda?
If you're thinking of it as in being against being ultra Orthodox, I guess. But let me put it this way: Remember when you were a kid and you had binoculars and you look through one end and everything seemed very up close, and you look through the other end and it looked very, very far away? That's what this is like. To you, you're seeing something completely different than what I'm seeing in a lot of other people. If you're religious, I'm using you. You're a Haredi person. You're going to be, I can't believe they're saying this.
Let me ask you this then. Fine.
To a secular person, it's like, oh, isn't that sweet?
Great point. Yeah, I got it. Great point. That's a great point. But let me ask you this. Just to explain my perspective. Yeah. As a member of the LGBT
whatever. Tell me the letters, the alphabet people. Yes.
As a member of the LGBTQ plus community, I think whatever it is, if I were to do a story for Vice News that would get 1 million plus views, and the story was about a community, not one person, but a community of gay people standing on the streets with signs saying all heterosexuals are bad people. And
our mothers.
What's that?
Those are our mothers. We can't do that.
Well, I understand, but how would you feel if Vice News was producing?
Well, it would be ridiculous.
And they were all wearing the rainbow, and they were all misrepresenting.
I'll give you a better example.
Misrepresenting the community, right?
Gay people who are against gay marriage or against something to do with gay rights. That does exist. There are people like that. So, of course, I would see it. It doesn't reflect the majority. And then, of course, the homophobic people will use it, of course. but I am also a big believer that
I think that's far more debatable. I think that that's not a good comparison because, you know, even though it may be the minority opinion, I don't think there are any religious. Well, there are some, but very few. I mean, less than 1% of the Haredi community do not believe. I haven't done a study, by the way, full disclaimer, but do not believe that Eretz Israel, that the land of Israel, should be a place where Jews live. I mean, so these people are literally. Yeah, so I think it's much more. We're drawing a comparison between a very, very small outside the camp group that are holding signs saying that Israel should be destroyed, right?
Yeah, of course. No, and
that's not the same. That's not the same as, you know, as someone in the LGBTQ plus community living a life freely with their own preference privately, right? Saying that I want to live a private life and I don't think that we should be making such a whatever, you know, making such a change in the law and the policy and all that stuff. I think that's very different than declaring that a country should be abolished or like destroyed or worse.
They're different issues, but I'm trying to give you, you know, you asked
for so speak it out. Yeah.
And your comparison just doesn't, there is nobody like that. So I was trying to give you an example.
Right. Well, that's why I said if they were doing something more extreme, like protesting, you know, like your mother's, 100%.
Well, yeah, but you don't have that. That doesn't exist because there is no gay person who actually is. I mean, there's gay people who
that's the point.
Are angry.
That's literally the
because of what heterosexuals have done, but to gay people meaning. But you know, it's a bit.
But Corey, that's the point. That's the point. What if Vice News covered such a story?
Well, but I guess they could. I suppose they could.
And I mean that.
But I also find
just because they didn't cover that story doesn't mean they don't exist as well.
You're right. I've never met them, and it seems absurd to me that they would even exist.
I've never met in the TRIBECAST, right?
I have, and I've interviewed them. And they are a tiny, tiny, tiny minority. And yes, they get way, way too much viewer time.
It's a circus.
Because there are people who have certain agendas, political agendas,
news.
Or they want to believe.
Right. It's news. So that's what people.
It's exciting. They think it's the opposite.
It's different. What is that? Yeah. It catches the eye.
And people use it. I mean, you meet Palestinians all the time who think that, you know, the Neturei Karta people, the anti-Zionist people, are a huge group. They're a tiny group.
Right.
And I'm not saying that because I want them to be a tiny group. I'm saying they are a tiny group because they're a tiny group. So yes, people do that. Yes, of course it annoys me.
So how do you see it? Right. So,
but I don't get obsessive about it because when I put it in my own context, I go, really, are people really walking around thinking this is absolute reality? Probably not.
With all due respect, go back to the birthright trip, right? I said to the soldier, I said, I went up to her and profusely apologized. I said, I'm so sorry. I did not mean to put you on the spot like that. I know it probably, and I probably looked bad in front of the students for, like, you know, calling her out on all these things, like, you know, but I said, you don't understand. I said, you don't understand. I said, I'm on campus. I'm out, you know, in the trenches of assimilation, trying to give Jewish people a positive Jewish experience, a connection to community, bringing hundreds, if not thousands of, you know, literally thousands over the past, whatever, to Israel to experience and to see for themselves, you know, and when they go back, we're their only shot, you know, and so to portray like a black yarmulke, or
you're putting too much in the 20-year-old who's sitting there probably didn't take it very seriously what she said, and it doesn't mean he's ruined for life with.
But if you brand the firefighter that's running up a burning building as ISIS, then that's going to that has lasting effect on the person's chance at going to a place for Shabbos. You know, if that's the messaging that they're getting.
But that's not the only message they got. I disagree.
But I think it is.
Putting way too much emphasis on it.
Maybe in the birthright trip, but I'm saying as a whole, I'm trying to help. I'm now doing the Ask Project from the secular American assimilated Jewish perspective, right? So from their perspective, those ultra-Orthodox, even, you know, Chabad does a good job at this, but like those ultra-Orthodox are, you know, there's an agenda and there's like, they have a whole perspective on that. That's based on, a lot of it's based on the misrepresentation in the media. So what, from as a leftist journalist, so to speak, I mean,
Not a journalist, but okay.
what have been,
Sure.
yeah, no, but
And not such a
what,
leftist. I can go into that after, but doesn't matter. Go
say
ahead.
again?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm
Right.
not such a leftist. It depends on what you mean, but doesn't matter. Go ahead. Yes,
Okay.
very secular.
Right.
Absolutely.
I'm just going with the words you gave me earlier.
It's
So
fine. You're right. You're right. Go ahead. I'll wear a crown.
right. But that's another whole story, right? Once you like sort of drill down on any label, of
It's
them,
not
right.
exactly correct, but doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
So, what has been like the biggest paradigm shift for you? What has been the biggest paradigm shift for you? Not withstanding, fringe
Well,
groups
it
that are
wasn't
outside
with
the
the
camp.
religious. It wasn't with Jewish religious people at all. I mean, a little bit. Like I said, religious or not religious settlers. That was a little bit of a wow. Okay, it's much more moderate than I thought. And Palestinians. So that's the part I was joking about. I'm not such a leftist because I think the right wing in Israel is much more correct about their analysis about Palestinians than the left is. Now, the left have really great intentions. That's why I still call myself a leftist, because I really do believe in humanistic values, and I believe that we should all be living together and be equal, and whatever that means. But the right has a better analysis of what Palestinians think than the left does. At least the left, how it used to be, not the left. There's not much of a left today in Israel. But so yeah, that was very quickly. I'll give you the example. When my first question I asked Palestinians was, "Do you want to throw the Jews in the sea?" And I meant it not as a serious question. I meant it as a joke question because I asked a similar time, Israelis, "Why do you steal hummus from the Arabs?" I thought I'd make funny videos. That was just at the start, and I thought, why would any Palestinian or Muslim or Arab today want to throw the Jews in the sea? What a ridiculous concept. How silly is that? Nobody's going to say yes. The first guy I asked said, and this is all in the video, this is the order. The first guy said, no, we don't want to throw them in the sea. This is a Zionist conspiracy. The Zionists made this up, that we want to throw them in the sea. And I was like, oh, I don't know how to make a joke from that. So, okay, I'll go to the next guy. Next guy says, yes, I want to throw them in the sea. And I'm like, no, sweetie, you don't understand my question. Obviously, you can't possibly understand my question. He goes, no, I understand your question. And I got someone to translate in Arabic. He said, they stole my land. Of course I have to throw them in the sea. And I was like, oh, shit. Like, this is what we're dealing with. Like, that was when I realized that according to the people I had voted for on the left, and that the situation is not how we were taught to see it on the left. That you could call a paradigm shift. And it's not so much that I stopped thinking in leftist terms in the sense of, again, humanistic values, equality for all, being kind to each other. But I thought, wow, the right really do have this right. Like, they were right this whole time. That, I would say, is a shift. And then from then I kind of, I went, okay, so that's the situation.
How did you process that? Like, what did you attribute the misunderstanding to?
Of the leftists or mine?
Yeah, you said you had been sort of raised with a certain perspective that was not accurate.
I'm Canadian, and I had been. Yeah, I'm Canadian. Is it comes down to, and we believe in being fair and good to each other, and all conflicts are solvable. And if we just understand each other, we just listened, we would all get along. And then you realize that there are people who are very angry and very have a lot of fury. And wow, we got to deal with that. We gotta look at that. And it doesn't mean it's even solvable, because I don't know how to solve it. But we have to really look at that. And I don't want to be, not say that there's any point or any hope for peace, because I actually think there is, and you just need leaders on their side and on our side to actually lead us towards it. That's a big believer in this. Or using subtle ways of, improving life for everybody in some way that eventually they might come to the conclusion, well, maybe it is better. I am better off this way. I don't know how to solve it, but at the same time, I think it's important to understand it, because that's the situation. That's what it is. It doesn't matter how much I wish it wasn't that situation. It is that situation. So I try to understand it from that perspective.
Beautiful. And
I don't know if that's helpful, but
no, I hear. Very interesting. So now, do you think it sounds like the rift between the left and the right, so to speak, or I don't even want to call it left and right. I'd rather
In Israel, we're talking about?
I'm talking within, internally, so to speak, within the Jewish community in Israel.
Well, there's very little left. The left is kind of gone.
Oh, really? That's the yeah.
We were joking that the last 6 of us, we don't know who to vote for anymore because people are disillusioned. The left was wrong about
So many things. Yeah.
About nothing to do with economics. It had to do much more with peace with the Palestinians in the sense of how to get there. It's not that they were entirely wrong. It just didn't work out the way they thought it would work out, and a lot of factors involved.
Right.
Yeah, and so people became disillusioned, so they moved rightwards.
Very interesting. So it's funny because the demographics are like in 10, 20 years, Israel's going to be a very different country. Different country, right? What's that?
Could be. I don't know. They said that
the Hasidim,
the Arabs, and it didn't happen.
If you just look at birth rates, if you look at the birth rates, and you project that demographically, I mean, anything could change. But
yes, chances are the religious will have a much bigger component than the secular. Right. But you don't know. They said, I'll remind you, remember 20, 30 years ago, they said the same thing about the Arab birth rate and how it's, the Arabs are going to out children, the Jews, and it's going to be, if we don't take control, and then the Arabs are having less children. So,
oh, really?
I mean, you don't know what's going to happen.
Change.
Sure, it could happen.
So what about breaking down the stereotypes between the religious and non-religious communities in Israel?
What specific?
I'm saying the Ask Project, focusing a series of questions or even
send them to me. Absolutely. What I do is people send me questions, and then I do searches in all my email addresses of how often I received a similar question. And if I received it a couple of times, then usually I'll go out and ask the question.
Great. Okay. Beautiful.
So
how do people
received any questions about secular, religious? I can't remember. Nothing comes to mind. It's much more about what do religious people think about
I have a question.
Sure.
Would you host a secular Israeli at your house that you've never met for Shabbos?
I haven't asked that. I have asked sort of a similar but Palestinian type question. I asked Israelis, would you have a Palestinian over for Leila Seder, for the Seder? And I asked Palestinians for Ramadan, would you have a Jew?
Actually, the Seder is an interesting. We should schmooze next time.
So yeah, send your question for sure. And so I'm asking religious people, or
asking the religious community.
Okay.
And you can ask the non-religious community. The secularists. I don't know what you call them. Whatever.
Well, I'm trying to make it as wide as possible. So if I ask secular, because they don't usually have a Shabbat meal.
Okay. So ask. Would you host a random? Ask both types of people for an extended 2 to 3 hour feast for an extended 2 to 3 hour feast with l'chaims and
yeah, send me the question.
A meaningful discussion and singing and I don't know what the equivalent would be without Shabbos.
And they'll probably say, wait, what's the follow-up question when they say, yeah, but they're not going to eat at my house because I don't keep kosher. They'll say, okay, you bring in kosher food.
Well, you can bring it in. Bring it in.
Okay. I always need a follow-up question because sometimes they stump me with something that goes, shit.
It's a good question. That's a good question.
Okay. Yeah. So I need good follow-up questions too for when they try to, because people haven't really thought of any of these questions before. So they usually look for the quickest way out of it.
Yeah,
so
it would get complicated. It would get complicated. I mean, you're right. That would be the follow-up question. I hear. Yeah, you have to.
If your goal is kiruv in the sense of secular and religious, eating together, doing something together, getting to know each other. If that's your focus, I'll focus on that. I'll try to.
Yeah, I think my focus is to break the stereotypes. My focus is to drown Unorthodox, the movie, with accurate and Vice News's coverage of Naturi Karta, to drown those tars and all the feathers in the hat with more accurate and holistic and full picture, accurate picture. I think is the most important thing. Is when populations are misrepresented, that's your passion. You're trying to hear what is the other side, what is really going on, and that those paradigm shifts are really important to society as a whole. Sure. And so our society.
One thing I did ask, and I don't remember the answers, is secular Israelis, what do you think of Haredim? And it was very, if I remember correctly, and you have to go back and check, but I don't think anyone said anything negative. They really didn't. And I really tried to get like the secular people who, you know, wouldn't be biased in some way. I didn't hear as much antagonism as I expected, but maybe I'm remembering, because sometimes I have, you know, this in my head, oh, everyone's getting along better than I thought. So go back and look.
Yeah, I hope that your efforts will continue to build bridges. You know, it's a really important thing for people to see and be able to talk about the elephant in the room. You know, that they think about a particular group, and to, you know, bring unity in the world. The polarization right now.
If even if there is, you know, you have an issue. I won't even say a stereotype. You have an issue with whatever the other group is. At least understanding where it's coming from. Understanding
Totally.
why it exists, and each side understanding that. I mean, it doesn't mean that one side is absolutely right. It never is. So, yeah, that's what I would hope for.
Beautiful, beautiful, and that's what you're going for, to bring understanding to two sides, to two different groups,
and in multiple sides in this case, because in, you know, Jewish Israelis, you have multiple sides. The Palestinian sides.
Beautiful.
Well, but yeah, as close as possible as I can get to that. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's important. I think that's the style of what the video, or what the videos can give the viewer.
Amazing.
The news, like you said, the media does all these exposés about very particular topics. Sometimes they're relevant, sometimes they're real, sometimes they're not. I'm just trying to get a cross section of what people think about different topics.
Corey, I appreciate everything you do, and I love your mission, because, you know, where the media covers, and maybe we'll close with this, but where the media covers all of the sort of paradigm shifts in not necessarily a more accurate way, you know, to the circuses and the outliers, and, you know, sometimes that they misrepresent groups, creating more polarization, more conflict in the world.
Yeah.
You're breaking down those misrepresentations. You're showing the other side. You're giving a voice to people on the ground, so that they can represent themselves. And I think, Corey, that's a wonderful mission, and we appreciate your efforts and everything that you do.
And I give this invitation often, but when you come to Israel, and mostly if I haven't done your question yet, then you contact me and you come with me and you ask the question, and you can, you know, ask it any way you want.
I'll blow your mind, man. You want to spend a couple days with me on the ground? I will blow your mind at what you'll see.
Sounds good.
We can explore together. You know, it's so many fascinating nooks and crannies of community and perspective, and, you know, it's an important thing for unity, for shalom. Maybe I'm a Kohen, so that's my I have a natural need for this, so to speak. You know, it's a driving force in my life. But it's, having grown up non-religious, and, you know, and had my perception of what the Torah was, even, you know, is you know, shifting that paradigm, and really deeply understanding through the experiential journey of life is what it's all about. So.
Okay, well, you're very welcome.
I look forward to it. I will take you up on that offer, and maybe we can circle around, and hopefully soon, with Corona, the vaccine coming out now, and roll up the sleeves for as much time as you'll give me. I mean, you want to go for a week? We'll do it. You know.
I don't know. I have a job, so I can't take off a week. But yes, absolutely, a day or two. Absolutely.
I appreciate it. Corey, thank you so much for your time and everything you do, and I look forward to watching more of the Ask Project. How can people send an email?
At the end of each video is a Gmail address. So it's askisraelis@gmail or askpalestinians@gmail. It's at the end of every video. So people don't usually wait to the end of the video. So they you know, search for me somehow. So sometimes I get them to my work email, which is not great, but, you know. And on Facebook, there is an Ask an Israeli, Ask a Palestinian group as well.
Okay, great. Well, hopefully people will check that out, and you'll have some more questions coming in soon.
Sounds good. Thanks.
This has been wonderful, Corey. My name is JP Katz, and this is the TRIBECAST at tribejournal.org, and we look forward to seeing you next time.